let's talk about part two of the
Yeah.
preparation of this beast system.
So, we went through a lot of the background, a lot of the imagery, a lot of the signs and symbols for some consecutive events that we're seeing happening current time. Um, One of those events being the cross of the procession with the Pope. Then we have the the Chartres, France pilgrimage that is occurring. And it just keeps getting better. Like, keep your eyes on France right now. We don't have pictures for these things, but go ahead and just put up the first picture that we have of the Verser Lynette, France area.
Okay.
Um, One of the current things I saw continuing to happen, I told you that there's, a sister group that's connected to um, this event going on there, but then I started seeing um, some things that were going on in some of the other churches right around these areas. And you have a climate change group that likes to parade in the official attire of Sisters of Light. And um, I saw those guys have showed up in France. The last time they really popped their head up was when Johnny Depp had his big court case, and these Sisters of Light popped up and were doing their protest and their little escapade at at the you know across from the area where that trial was. And interestingly enough, then, whenever they leave, you get fires that pop up. So I'm just gonna say that as a precursor. Watch, because you're gonna see all these fires popping up everywhere, and it's because you've got, you know, people engaged in witchcraft that are, using that witchcraft as a weapon against us in different areas. So that's part of this. But go ahead to the next one.
Would you say
So,
particularly, sorry, I want to just ask about the fires. Would you say particularly like in Australia, the devastating fires they've been having there in the last, especially 8 to 10 years, I'd say. Do you think that that is part of that as well?
no, that I mean, you could have some stuff going on there, but I don't think that's particular to what we're
Right.
speaking of here. It's going to be in connection with the things that we're going to talk about today.
Right.
And they're accessing certain or opening certain doors basically to underworlds. That's where we're going to see things popping up. Um, so here again, just a map kind of that France area so you can see kind of where that's at in connection to everything. Just as a brief summary, we talked about the Verser-Lynette area there in France, and the Cathedral of Chartres, Chartres, and we're going to see stuff happening there. Go ahead to the next one. So let's dive deeper into this Verser-Lynette area. This is the crust for that, and it really is going to come into play because we're going to see this imagery. Like, even look at you know, the Pope, the things like we'll see images where we're going to see some of the signs, the symbols, the things that they're using in connection to the system that, to us at face front, it has no meaning, but to them, they're actual contracts. So this is the crest for the Verser Lynette area. We see a couple big prominent things. First, in the background, we see the color green. We see this white looking V chevron. And then at the bottom, we see blue. And at the top, we see, what looks like the head of you know, what would you call it? Like a cane, or, you know, I'm forgetting what they're called right now in royalty, but a staff. Um, but this is common in the priests to carry these staffs with these elaborate decorations on top of them. And then at the bottom, we see this tree. Um, so let's begin to break down these symbols and what they represent. Let's start at the top with the rod top. We see it's curved, and wherever you see kind of that spiral curving in, that is going to be considered a rod of Ashtaroth. In fact, the Mother of Darkness, before my proctor took her position, she was the main holder of, a rod that had a top very similar to this, but it had the big ruby jewel in the middle and stuff like that. So they'll put different things in the middle, whether it's an actual stone or jewel. Here we see beyond the jewel that it's in the format of a five-pointed star. We also see that the bottom of the curl, um, we kind of see like what looks like all these dragon scales going down into a tail, um, being very significant because we know, within the system, within the Jesuit Catholic Church, that really, they've got contracts, and we've talked about how those contracts just are not on land, but also in the oceans, under the seas, and in different areas where they have underground water kingdoms. Um, the most famous of that being Urlantia, also known as Atlantis. Um, so, this representing not only their contracts with Ashtaroth, but Ashtaroth in her multitude of names. Um, she's not just known as Ashtaroth, and we did a show on this on your um, membership channel where we talked about Jezebel and how Jezebel is one of the names for Ashtaroth. But you also have her going by, Artemis, by Lilith, by, um, Queen of Heaven, Queen of the Dead, Fatima. Put a goddess name on it, and it's all going to connect back to Ashtaroth. So, this is what we see. And, the five-pointed star in the system, the stars are very significant because they tell several things. At one layer, every five-pointed star, as it says in the book Initiates of the Flame, represents to them the Star of Bethlehem. The star that appeared over the manger when Jesus Christ was born. That's what they want you to believe it represents. Which then represents the heralding of the Christ within, the marriage of the Lamb. And what to them does that mean? It represents homosexual sex. So when you think about Ashtaroth and the worship of Ashtaroth and these elaborate temples that they built to Ashtaroth, what do they do in those temples? They gather. You've got people that are dedicated to be temple escorts or prostitutes. And what kind of prostitution are they going to engage in? It's every form of sexual sin, including the homosexuality. Um, so, that's how they believe that the God within rises, is through their sex magic. So, so this tells us there that, that um, not only is this area known for its worship of Artemis or Ashtaroth, but they've got some special things. You've got, you know, a staff topper here that, their focus with that priest is in that church is the worship of the water entities, the female Leviathan, and also known as Ashtaroth. And along with that, you've got, you know, the homosexual sex, uh, the escort services that they're going to provide. Now, what's interesting for this is when you look at symbology and imagery, you know, next we see that staff topper sitting. I mean, think about this, the staff topper sitting above this V. You know, what does that V represent? The chalice or the female womb. Um, and in that, you know, you get that chevron that's in the V shape representing that chalice. So, um, you know, all of this imagery for them is going to connect to what are they doing? Um, you know, raising up women in the area that are going to be used as, you know, prostitutes within that temple of Artemis, raising up men that are going to be escorts or prostitutes in that area. Um, you know, that's kind of what it's all representing. And then you get into the water, you know, telling us that there's something there. They have a connection with what they're going to consider the Kabbalah tree of life underwater. Um, so, you know, there being an underground there and a place where they're going to practice their Kabbalah magic and raise up, because what is that imagery of the Kabbalah tree? We talked about it with the same imagery with the cross that we see the priest carry. Tree. Then as you go up, you have the female image standing on top of the head of the Leviathan. Then you've got the man on the cross or with his arms outstretched, but those two representing Adam and Eve, okay? And then, you know, the man is ascending up into his ultimate godhood. He's going to go through those female chevron chalices as they rise up from, you know, their water magic and get into, you know, does the green represent earth magic and earth authorities and earth contracts? Maybe. So they're going to rise up into that, you know, godhood, which is still as what? You know, I mean, look at that Ashtaroth, the staff topper. You know, they're going to rise through homosexual sex into their ascended godhood. And what is that going to connect to? Water dragons. You know, so this is also displaying their magical specs. What kind of magic are they getting into? The controlling of certain water creatures or beasts. Um, and that's going
Wow.
to go to something very particular as we continue on and look at the particular Kabbalah things coming out and what that Leviathan at the top is representing. One more thing with the V or
Jessie,
the chalice contract. Go ahead.
no, no, carry on. I will
Yeah, so
chime in
one more
after you've
thing
said
is
what.
that you get the different um, I guess we'll call them chevron formations. You could have them, you know, at the bottom where it's representing that V. You could have it at the top where it looks more like the Masonic compass, or you get like, you know, what I call the M's. I can't even do it with my fingers here, but like you'll have the one side where it looks like, you know, the star, the four or the two stars, and then it will flop and be like an M, so you get your M's and your W chevrons. What these can represent on a whole nother layer is they will, in Kabbalah magic, they'll place everything under cherubic or seraphim signs, and um, the V represents contracts with Uriel. So they're under, you know, you'll get um, contracts under Gabriel, you'll get contracts under Saint Michael, then you'll have the contracts under Uriel, and then the western side is going to be contracts with Raphael. So it's just saying this area is contracted under Uriel. What that's going to impact is, specialties in studies of magic. When under the Uriel contracts, they'll get into the Book of Moses for some of their magical contracts and some of the books in that series, then, um, which are all connected to water contracts, water magic.
Okay, now I have to say I'm so glad someone in the chat actually said what I was thinking. Who was
What
that?
was
Let me
that?
just see. Was it Kimberly or someone saying
Flag
that
porn?
looks like a girl
Oh,
having an examination with her gynecologist? I'm sorry. As soon as I saw that thing, I was, wow, am I seeing things? Which to me, and as you say, the V would be the womb, feminine bits.
yeah,
But if you look at how that V is, it's like, and guys, we're all adults here, right? So it looks like a woman's legs. And if you look at where the tree is, where the rectum is, right? Underwater, and then you look at that staff thing. Now, to me, I'm freaking out here because I'm thinking about women having gynecological examinations. Because this, to me, is reeking of something like that as well. So these dodgy doctors who are giving women gynecological examinations, right? We know, for example, they're taking the stem cells from the woman, or the cells from the woman's pap smear, and they're using that we've been told. So there's definitely dodginess going on there. But my question is, when it comes to this type of sex magic, and these doctors that unsuspecting women go to, this to me has just opened up a whole new, excuse the pun, doorway.
yeah. Well, I mean, when you really lay it out, they're clearly displaying exactly what is going to happen. And, I've testified in my affidavits where, in their circle groups in the sex magic for rituals, um, literally, you'll have one one victim and you'll have multiple people in the circle group all performing sexual acts on that victim at one time. So, if you can put that into thoughts, you'll understand what they're outlining here about what they engage in magically, you know, and I think it's pretty accurate, that would be what I would read, that this is what they're going to do, in this area. This is their specialties, and they don't, there isn't any holding back. Um, it's worse than we could even think or imagine for these victims, and sometimes it needs to be outlined like that. That you know they're not just intruding one way. They're taking advantage in every way all at one time, and that victim doesn't know if they're going to live or die through the experience. It's not a pleasant thing.
There are 18 leaves on that tree, which translates back into the numerology of 9. What would be significant about the 18 leaves on that tree there? Anything that you can tell us?
Well, you also get it broken into groups of 6, 6, and 5.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's much more than we could think or imagine. Um, when you break it down that way, you've got a 6, 6 at the bottom and a 9 up at the top. You know,
Yeah.
if that gives you
Yeah.
more ideas of things, and you know It's
Sure.
just there's so much to it, but I want to kind of, yeah, I think we'll just leave it there, and I'm not gonna
Yeah,
go
just
into
freaks
more
me
about.
out that because of stuff like that. I mean, women are at their most vulnerable during that
Yeah,
examination, right? Oh,
yeah.
to think that your
So
doctor is
this
so
is
creepy.
their classic,
Oh,
when we're talking about the Kabbalah tree, we're talking about the imagery of the imagery the Jesuits use of Christ on the cross. We know that Christ did not remain on the cross. That's the image of his death. Why do they keep Christ on the cross? It's not because they're remembering his death or his resurrection. In fact, it has nothing to do with his resurrection. It has to do with their Kabbalah magic and their belief that they're going to ascend as gods. And, this is how you'll see it, where, here we see in their Kabbalah ladder, also representing the Kabbalah tree, the Rosicrucian cross, that that center of this, with the man, represents that base uh, colonnade that you'll see in the Solomonic contracts. So whenever they see any of those images, this is what they understand it to mean, and they connect it with the internal chakras. um, but each of those, when you see each of those circles, it also represents principalities, entities, authorities. So the lines in between are the ribbon contracts between those principalities and authorities and the man or the woman. Um, at the very bottom of that, you have Leviathan and you have the woman standing on top. Then you have the man standing in the crucified flesh format, ascending up into his godhood. Um, so, this is their base imagery. And, we see them trying to use it, telling us it's representing something else, but this is their Kabbalah tree and their cross imagery. Where is it going to connect to? Let's go to the next one. This is one of their key books that they're going to study. Oh, we'll come back
Terry.
to that one. Go to one more. Um, no, keep going. So we'll get back to this imagery of that one. I probably put it in the wrong place, but go ahead to the next one.
I've got two of those in a row, and then that one.
Okay, yep, that's the one I want. So
Okay.
the Kabbalah tree, we see that seal actually put on their book that they're going to study, the Kabbalah of the Golden Dawn. Um, we also see on that imagery a right side up triangle representing a holy contract, an upside down triangle representing an unholy contract. Now think about what we just saw with the last picture, that Kabbalah ladder image with all the line contracts and the man. And, look at this image. What do we see even behind the seal of the Kabbalah tree, beyond the seal of the triangles? You start to see circles. And think about that. What did we see behind Christ on the cross that the Pope was carrying? You see him sit, you see it looks like Christ is on the cross, but you see this circle behind it. Is that representing his godhood? No, you know, it really doesn't. It's going back to these contracts, um, line contracts within Kabbalah magic, and all representing Kabbalah. Um, so their cross imagery that they're going to use goes back to these contracts. Now, this is a book, again, we talk about a lot of the different books the system uses in magic on this show. This is not a book I would recommend getting or having. It is used in magic, and that's its purpose, and it is meant to connect people, to make contracts with different entities. which we'll get into some of it today. And I'm going to just specifically show some of the pages that get to the contracts we're going to talk about today. Go ahead to the next one. So as we look at this, we see, the Kabbalah contract in this book. Chapter 8, you see there on the left-hand page is kind of what I was talking about. That base Kabbalah ladder, this is ways it will be displayed. So let's start at the very bottom. You see a circle with a Leviathan with 7 Leviathan heads. And you see how they've kind of done creatively that Kabbalah tree kind of rising up in this imagery in the book. Above the Leviathan head, you see the woman. The woman is seen holding the 3 pillars. You've got 2 on the sides, and then the man and the woman are in that center pillar. So when I talk about the Kabbalah, the base Solomonic magic, the 3 line contracts, this is where it's from. This is how they see it. Then you see, kind of the man standing above the woman, and then his arms outstretched like they're on a cross. And really, his arms are stretching out to those other pillars. And it's all about their contracts with, what do each of those pillars represent. It represents, in the Solomonic magic, you have 3 verses in scripture. So each of those pillars represents a verse out of the book of Exodus chapter 14. The pillar all the way to the left represents Exodus 14:19. The middle pillar that the man and the woman are on represents Exodus 14:20. And on the right, you have the third pillar representing Exodus 14:21. Out of all of scripture or Torah, those are the only 3 verses that when they are written a certain way, you end up with all 72 names of the demons that are in the keys of Solomon that Solomon documented in the 72 keys of Solomon. So that's why this imagery is the core or the base of Solomonic magic. So, those representing that, what are those 3 verses about? There, when Moses stands at the edge of the Red Sea, the Lord tells him to lift up the staff. So think about this Kabbalah tree. What do you see? You see the man with his arms outstretched with a header or a staff on top, right? The crossbar of the cross being that staff that was raised up over the waters. And then you see the waters parting, which is what the 2 pillars on the side represent, those partings. So in that, what are they seeing? They're seeing power and authority, and that man ascending into godhood, where he has authority and power to control the wind, the waves, the water, the entities, control things that happen between the spirit and the spiritual and the physical worlds. That's, the epitome of his magical abilities and his abilities to control the physical world and the spiritual world is what makes him a god or not. So that's where this goes back to. Now, moving forward, why are we seeing, what's the connection now with the Pope? And he's displaying this cross with Jesus on it. You see a seal on the back of that. And, where is it all going back to? It goes back to here, to chapter 8 of this Kabbalah book, the Garden of Eden. And I want to actually read this because this plays a role in some of the things that we're seeing come out. It says, in the Golden Dawn, basically Practicus grade, meaning, you're ascending into your godhood, you're practicing, you haven't got to your fullness of your degrees yet. But associated with the Sephiroth, which is another word for the seraph or whatever spirits they're connecting to of God, and you'll see in the Golden Dawn, they are notorious for changing letters. That's part of their secret coding. They do it in the Masonic books too. Um, H is one of the symbols that they're going to use instead of the G. The candidate is shown a diagram of the Garden of Eden before the fall, and the following explanation is given to the Hierophant. So this imagery that we see of the Kabbalah tree is what they're going to show the person representing the Garden of Eden. So everything's about contracts, understanding their line contracts. Notice that when we look at that image, we see the woman and we see 4 branches stemming out of her. Well, what does that have to do with the Garden of Eden? It's that we know out of the Garden of Eden, you have 4 living rivers that extend out. So that getting into, also their imagery of the monarch program, the 4 wings of the butterfly, all representing the same things, the base 4 wellspring contracts. This then gets to the contracts between Ashtaroth and the abysses below, as well as the high places above, the 4 high places. So that's why you see, that's why they're going to show the person. Sorry if I spoiled it, if anybody, for all those Golden Dawn high level members, the secrets are out. Um, you know, they're going to show that imagery of the Garden of Eden because it goes back to um, their power and authority over rivers and springs. And it says, before you is representing the symbolism of the Garden of Eden at the summit of the supernal Seraphoth, summed up and contained in the Ema Elohim. Now remember that Hebrew word Elohim is plural. The I am at the end of that word makes it plural, Elo, and you have in that passage where God is talking to lowercase gods, the little g's, and he's saying, let us make man in our, but then it's more personal to the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, in our image. So you get scholars that, talk about how the Elohim is a name for God, but it also represented the collective of the heavenly hosts, those that he created to rule and reign in heaven with him. The woman of the 12th chapter of the Apocalypse. So as you go through this book, when you get to chapter 12, let's get into this book. What is this book? It basically outlines their end time contracts. By the time you get to the 12th chapter, you're dealing with apocalyptic contracts. But anyway, in the 12th chapter, you learn that the woman is clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet. Upon her head is a crown of 12 stars, which they're going to call the Kether. Now, what is this representing? It's representing their contracts, the woman that is going to have the sun and the moon and wear a crown of 12 stars. What do those 12 stars represent? We're going to get into that. Let's skip down a little further because it says, this image, that Kabbalah tree is known as the Tetragrammaton, and is joined to the Elohim. So, that Kabbalah ladder, each of those circles is connected to a principality, authority, as I've explained many times. Um, you know, it's read like a clock, and it's about their authority, their jurisdictions that were given them by God. So that imagery is joined to the Elohim, um, you know, representing placements, planting in the Garden of Eden, eastward in Eden. So it represents the power of the Father joined unto the glory of the face of the Ancient of Days. Um, you know, that's all going to mean stuff to them in their studies. Going further, um, it says, which later is from Malkuth, which is, you know, each of those circles, they're going to represent an entity, like you have up at the very top of the Kabbalah ladder, that entity representing Abaddon, the very middle circle, you know, representing Ashtaroth, and then you have the very bottom circle representing their contract with Leviathan. Um, so it, you know, Leviathan's considered the lowest Sephira, and between the rest of the Sephira and the kingdom of the shells. What? What kingdom of the shells? Who knows about this kingdom? Is this a real kingdom? Which later is represented by the great red dragon. Who's the great red dragon? Leviathan. Having 7 heads and 7 infernal palaces and 10 horns. You know, these are places. They're places where they have the contracts. So, in this, what I want to bring out is that kingdom of the shell. So let's go back to where we see the Pope with the cup. When we think about this, you know, literally the cup is also represented in that Kabbalah tree, the man and the woman being that middle part of the cup, the bottom of the cup representing Leviathan and his kingdom, that part with the 3 colonnades where the crossbar goes, that's going to be the actual chalice part of the cup. So think about you know, and I'm just going to be outright, you know, and I'm sorry if there's any Catholics or Jesuit Catholics in our group here in our chat watching. This isn't personal. This isn't a personal attack. This is from my testimony, my experience in the Luciferian Brotherhood. What do we have here? You know, what is he raising up? This has nothing to do with him symbolizing or remembering the work that Jesus Christ did on the cross to forgive sins. Absolutely, this is not a symbology of Christ or a partaking in the work that Christ has done. This cup is a cup of blasphemy. You know, let's look at it. What do they literally have at the top of the cup? They got Christ on the cross, representing his death. The imagery is going to go down in the Kabbalah ladder. What do we see at the base? You see the shells. What does it represent? The kingdom of the shells. You know, it represents the Kabbalah tree. And, you know, what's the blood? You know, what are they representing with that in the cup? It's not the work that Christ has done. It's literally a sacrifice unto the water gods. That's how they're seeing it. You know, and, you know, that man um, represented is not Christ, but themselves being elevated up in that Kabbalah magic, in the homosexuality, um, to partake in, you know, their contracts with these entities and deities. So that's key. You know, you see now that, you know, in the Kabbalah of the Golden Dawn also can be known by other names, the Aurora, Aurorae. At the top, you get the Order of Melchizedek. You're also going to get some of your Order of the Phoenix, you know, at these top levels. But Um, the Golden Dawn, also known as the Hermeneutic Order of the Golden Dawn. Um, you know, and so this stuff is going to come out of their belief system. Um, some of the important things, it talks about the kingdom of the 12 shells. Where does that come from? Let's go back to that page with the Kabbalah ladder and go to the next one. Let me just see what the next one was again, but keep going one more and then the book, not that one quite yet. Go back one more where it had yeah, that one. So when you get to next chapters, um, it begins to bring out more. And where this goes is literally that, a deeper layer of the triangles and the contracts that they represent in Kabbalah magic. Like, we talk about how the right side up and the upside down triangle, when put together, create that seal of Israel, representing the Sanhedrin, representing those that they outright rejected Jesus as the Messiah. Even though he fulfilled over 250 prophecies that we see in scripture, they outright rejected him as the Messiah. Why? Because they're going to raise up their own Messiah, that will be the Antichrist. In that further, um, this gets into their worship of the feminine and the female Leviathan. So where do the triangles go back to? That the upside down triangle represents points on a sigil, those points, making a V shape with that upside down triangle, that representing a sign that comes out of Ashtaroth's sigil and her authorities, that, her contracts with Leviathan for the womb. Those contracts are going to extend up to certain things with two other entities beyond Ashtaroth and Leviathan, and you get Baal, which we know Baal is notorious for wanting to receive infant sacrifices. That was what the land of Canaan was known for, was for sacrificing their infants before Baal. On the other side of that contract, right across from Baal, where does that crossbar go? It goes to Samael. So you get your contracts between Baal and Samael, which, we've talked about that upper cross line in their regional contracts also represents that contract with Samael. So then it gets even further, because what does the right